I do allow people to film at my academy. We have an advanced class, like a competition class. I allow it in that class. I would not allow it in other classes, to be honest. I will always ask for consent of my training partner. I think that's obviously important. But at a certain point, it's, what is everyone going to film? If you have 30 people in the class, everyone sets up a camera somewhere and films the class. It's kind of, a little bit much. And also, I think this is a trend you see in jiu-jitsu where people, set up their camera somewhere and they film a training round to the unsuspecting training partner and then post like highlights on Instagram, which I think is obviously inappropriate and, not cool to do that.
Welcome back to the BJJ Fanatics podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Ford. My guest today is a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He's a 3-time Rise Invitational champion, a Sapatero Invitational champion, and also a Fight to Win Super Fight winner. He's an ADCC East Coast Trials silver medalist, and he's also the co-founder of Vanguard Academy in Lake Grove, New York. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to be joined today for the second time on the show by Jason Rao. How are you today, Jason?
I'm good, Ryan. Thanks for having me.
Of course. It's great to have you back here, my friend. I really enjoyed our last conversation, so I'm looking forward to catching up with you. It was a couple of years ago that we talked. So what have you been up to since then? How's the growth of the academy? How's life?
It's good. Things are good. Yeah, I think it was probably at least a year and a half ago, close to 2 years ago. Things are going really well. I actually opened a second academy. So
good for you.
Yeah. So it's going great. Business is good. So I have 2 academies now. One is in, the first one's in Lake Grove, and the second one's in Comac, which is actually the town that I live in, which is awesome. It's nice and close to home. But gym's been going great. Have a lot of awesome students. I'm really thankful for all of them. All my competitors are just my normal like 9-to-5 guys who are training with me. It's great to have such a big, awesome community to be a part of. So I'm really happy about that.
That's incredible, man. Good for you. Congratulations on the success. And
thank you.
There's a lot of people listening. Anytime I talk to academy owners, I love picking your brains about this because there's a lot of people listening who are aspiring teachers and who want to have their own school someday once they get their black belts. What point did you reach after the success of the first school where you realized it would be safe and viable to open a second location? What were some triggers you saw, and what was the process like of opening a second spot?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I definitely, before we even opened the first spot, we kind of had the goal of eventually having, a couple of gyms, and we don't plan to stop at 2, but, that was kind of always the goal. It was just a matter of, I guess, the financial viability of it, obviously making sure the first gym is doing well financially, but it's profitable, all that stuff. We actually had intentions to do it even sooner. It just... And, for people that are listening that eventually do go this route, at least in New York, I don't know how it is everywhere else, but finding the right location can take some time. We had a few leases that fell through. We thought we were going to close on a few deals and it ended up not working out. So, that is definitely, with the second location, even our first location, that could be a limiting factor. So a piece of advice I would give is start looking well before when you actually want to open. If you want to open, early 2026, I would start looking now, because sometimes it could really take that long to find the right spot and have the deal go through and eventually get that space where you can start to, build out your academy.
Yeah, that's great advice. I could definitely see in a place as crowded as New York where, there's some cities where they build outwards. So the suburbs just kind of grow and keep expanding.
Sure.
In places up north though, like your Chicago's, your New York, your Philadelphia's, everything grows upwards. So once everything's been built, it's now just okay, this is the inventory here, and you got to figure out.
Exactly. Yeah. It's just a matter of waiting until something opens up or finding the right space that opens up at the right time, with the right location, so it could be a little bit of a process for sure.
Yeah. And I imagine too that the cost of rent is probably a lot higher than other parts of the country too, just because there's limited inventory,
I mean, at least where I am, I'm in Suffolk County, or both gyms are in Suffolk County. Even from the first to the second gym, the second gym is more west, the rent prices increase. But as you go more west towards New York City, generally speaking, it gets even higher. And then prices in New York City are just insane for what I hear.
Yeah, I've heard the same thing. I've heard even just like renting a small studio apartment in New York is like, like you got to be a millionaire. You got to be doing really well.
Yeah. It's wild.
Well, I know that expanding to multiple locations is a real finicky thing for a lot of business, for a lot of school owners, because I've seen schools that expand too quickly. Like they open one location and they take a loan and open a second and a third, thinking like, hey man, if we can build all these simultaneously, we can have a pretty nice network of schools.
Sure.
And then something comes along and it causes problems. Maybe there's not quite the strength of management for each of these locations that you have. And I've seen a lot of academies go under because of that. I've also seen the flip side where some academies are like bursting at the seams they can barely contain all the students they have.
Sure, yeah.
But they're just afraid to take that step to open another location. So I guess what kind of pacing do you see for yourselves? Like I know you have a co-founder. So is he running one school and you're running the other? Is that kind of
a little bit. So my partner, Nick Ronan, he's someone that, we train together at the Blue Basement and under Matt Serra. We're both black belts under Matt. We trained there, for almost 10 years together. So it's not quite one of us is at one gym, one is at the other gym. I mean, we're both spread between both gyms, but we're lucky in the sense that, we have some full-time instructors that work under us. We have a full-time manager that works for us. So we have like quite a bit of help. And, I'm lucky in that, a lot of the people that are teaching for me are people that have been training with me, upwards of 10 years type of thing. Just because, originally I taught for Matt Serra for about 10 years and, I was with him for so long. And when I opened my gym, with Nick, we had some students that followed us, and a lot of them were students that had been just training with us for a number of years. So we kind of right away had instructors kind of ready to go type of thing. It wasn't like we had to build people up from white belt all the way up to the point where they could teach. Well, certainly I'm sure, down the line, some of the people that started with us at our gym will eventually become instructors, but we kind of had a good staff ready to go. So in that sense, we've been lucky where, we've been able to kind of fill in those classes and put qualified instructors in the right places.
That's great, man. I imagine having such a close relationship with Matt Serra has been real beneficial too, because I could see where he would be a great mentor, considering that he owns multiple locations too. He's got the one in Huntington.
Yeah. So he had the Huntington and the Levittown location. So after COVID, he kind of condensed it all into Huntington.
Oh, okay.
So I was originally he originally had two locations. It was like East Meadow, and if you know Long Island, East Meadow is right next to Levittown. It's like down the block. So it was East Meadow and Huntington, and then East Meadow moved to Levittown, and then Huntington moved to Huntington in a bigger location. So we had like two smaller locations, and he expanded to two bigger locations. I was primarily at the Levittown location. And then when COVID happened, there was like a big issue with the landlord, no fault to Matt at all, but he had to close down the Levittown location, and he basically condensed everything into Huntington. But yeah, I mean, his gym has been open. I mean, at this point, I think they opened in 2000. So it's 25 years. I obviously spent so many years around him, so many hours there, like hundreds, thousands of hours there. It was like, I felt like a very natural progression to move and open my own spot. And Matt always kind of knew that I wanted to do that at some point. So he was very supportive. And yeah, I mean, like the time there and my relationship with him was absolutely invaluable to, being able to run my own place.
Yeah. No, I know. I've only met Matt a few times. Matt was one of like the very first interviews I ever did back in like 2015. Really? Yeah. He was like my fourth or fifth episode. And I was able to get that because my instructor back home in the US is like one of his best friends. Like they came up together at
who is it again? Remind me.
Paul Kraton.
Oh, Paul Crane. Yes, I remember.
Yeah,
that's how you know Anthony. Yeah,
that's how I know Tony. Yeah.
Of course.
So Paul runs Henzo Gracie Atlanta, which is Kraton MMA, and so he'd come for seminars and stuff. So I kind of had an in with him there. But I remember just him being like super generous with anything and everything you asked him about. And Paul always talked about his business prowess and how smart he is, how he runs his schools and stuff. So
yeah. He definitely for me like such a great mentor to have, and it was hugely instrumental for myself, like growing my business, like having been with him for all those years, no question.
That's awesome, man. Well, again, congratulations. And speaking of growth, obviously something that you focus on as an instructor is growing a team and growing the prowess of your students and things like that. What do you think are some habits of students that you see in your room that cause them to accelerate faster than others?
I mean, I'm certainly like consistency. That's. I mean, I'm sure that's a common denominator among all high level athletes in all sports. I mean, in jujitsu, I think a big thing is like willingness to, and I would say for myself, this was still instilled upon me, like from John Danaher a lot, is a willingness to like problem solve yourself. Um, I think certainly like wherever you're training, there's some type of coach or mentor that you have that has not all of the answers, but some of the answers to the issues that you're encountering in training. But I think like no matter where you're training, you have to have like a willingness to try to problem solve yourself and like constantly seeking to improve yourself as a grappler, whether that's in positions you're good at, positions you're bad at, like always having the mentality that you're like constantly problem solving and looking to improve on a regular basis. Like that's something I see. And it's like the types of students who can kind of teach themselves. Not that like not that that they don't seek the help from the coach, but like as a coach, you can guide them in the right direction. Obviously, help them with certain techniques and things. But then that student will take what you say and kind of like almost like turn it a level further and like improve more than just what you like told them to do, if that makes sense. Like they can like really improve on their own and get better on their own. And there's people like that everywhere, not just at high level gyms, but when you meet someone like that, who very clearly like is studious and can actively problem solve on their own, like those are the people that go the furthest in jiu-jitsu, no question.
I would love to zoom in even further on that because that's something that really resonates with me. When I was a purple belt, I got to a point where I realized that my instructor wasn't really holding my hand so much anymore. Like,
Sure.
I'd been through the fundamental stuff. I'd been through a lot of the intermediate training groups. And once I got to the advanced room, I realized it was much less about necessarily like teaching me techniques. And it was more about just, setting up training that was intended to develop our skills and get us
Sure.
lots of repetition and roles and stuff. So I found myself in a position where I was a little bit lost at first. And I realized, man, I really do have to take my training into my own hands here a little bit. I got to start, keeping a notepad with me. I got to start analyzing my notes. I've got to start figuring out where my gaps are rather than looking to my instructor who's running a room of 50 people and expecting him to recognize what I need to work on. The world doesn't revolve around me. So what do you think are some methods that you think are important for students who are in that position where they have to take their training into their own hands a little more, that make them more successful than others?
Yeah, I think especially having like I guess an honest, or as best you can, an honest analysis of your skill set, where you're strong, where you're weak, where you need to work on, where maybe you don't need to spend as time. I think that's really important. And I think especially like much newer students, they have trouble like actively recalling what occurs in a given training session or a given round with a particular person, because for example, like many times a newer student will come and ask a question. And it'll be a very general question. They'll say like, how do I pass the guard or something? Being a more experienced practitioner, that's like an extremely general question. Like there's a million ways you could pass the guard, right? And they're like unable to actually recall like what is happening during their training rounds, like where are things going wrong, where are things going right, versus like saying, yeah, I had an underhook in my knee slice position, but my partner was able to like bring their bottom elbow to their bottom knee and they were able to hip escape. Like, how can I fix this problem? That's like a very specific question. And like, yeah, sure. Just to, make sure your hips are more flush to your partner's hips and keep your knee wedged firmly against the side of their ribs, and they won't be able to elbow knee escape. Something simple like that. You can give like a very direct answer. But I think a lot of times students, they're not able to actively recall what's actually occurring during their training rounds, which makes it very hard to troubleshoot and like even get better, right? Because they don't know what to work on. So I think having like an honest analysis of where they're succeeding and where they're not, and then being able to actively, and this could just, partially be like, memory, your ability to retain or memorize or remember what's happening could be part of that skill. But, like remembering what is occurring in your training rounds and where things are falling apart and where you have to like, strengthen or what you have to strengthen or what you have to work on to improve.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Something, the solution for me personally was keeping a journal. Like, cause
Yeah,
you just described it like perfectly. Like I would finish my training, come home and think about it. And I'm like, yeah, oh, yeah, well, how did that happen? Or what did happen during that scramble? Or why did I end up in
sure.
that
Yeah,
bad position
yeah,
over and over again? And if I don't write it down like right away, it's gone. It's just
yeah. No, of
some people, I
course.
guess, have like a better hard drive where they can keep track of information, but mine is not that great. So I got to write it down. Do you encourage note taking and things like that with your students? Is that
Yeah,
something? Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah. If anyone's taking notes, I definitely encourage that. For me, I personally never took that many notes, and that's not to, obviously note taking is great. I've always felt like I had a pretty good memory, and I would always like record a lot of my training rounds coming up. Like I have, I mean, unfortunately, this data is probably lost, but like I had a iPad when I was like a white, blue, and purple belt, and I would like bring it to training all the time, and like Matt was nice enough to let me like put it on the side and record my training rounds,
Oh, wow.
and a lot of my students do that today, but like I had hundreds of hours of training like on my phone of doing like different positions. I would go home and watch it, and like for me that was almost like the taking notes. I would like watch it. I would like I guess see what I was trying to do during my drills, and then when I would actually train live, see what was different between the drilling and the training, and then the next day go in and troubleshoot that. For me, that was very, very helpful. The
Yeah.
recording of the rounds.
Yeah, I mean, video would be the ultimate solution, I think, because
Yeah,
even the best I do to take notes, sometimes in my notes I can explain what happened, but I can't see the exact sequence in my mind of how
sure.
a particular scramble or pass or escape happened. It would be incredibly beneficial to have video. Now, I know that some people feel some kind of way about that, about being filmed training and that kind
Sure.
of thing. So that's something people run into. What are your thoughts on
Sure.
that? Do you think that
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, so I do allow people to film at my academy. At a certain point, it's kind of, and again, I would say I allow them to film. Like we have a advanced class every day at 12. It's kind of like, quote unquote, like a competition class. I allow it in that class. I would not allow it in other classes, to be honest. A lot of the guys are fairly serious competitors, and I want to give that advantage to them. But I mean, personally, I think if I'm ever, and at this point, I don't film my training. I sometimes have a videographer who will film stuff for my Instagram, and occasionally I'll film a training round. I will always ask for consent of my training partner. I think that's obviously important. But at a certain point, it's, what is everyone going to film? If you have 30 people in the class, everyone sets up a camera somewhere and films the class. It's kind of a little bit much. And also, I think this is a trend you see in jiu-jitsu where people set up their camera somewhere and they film a training round to the unsuspecting training partner and then post like highlights on Instagram, which I think is obviously inappropriate and not cool to do that. Definitely, like you said, there's some implications with doing that. It's kind of like a 50-50 in my head. I think in some cases, well, not in some cases, it can be very beneficial as long as the student's using it for the right reason, and as long as you have an environment where students are not doing that type of thing, right? Where they're not like clout chasing with their phones set up on the side of the mat. They're like actually doing it to like objectively improve their performance. And I think in that type of environment, it's a little different. But I think you need to set the right environment, no question.
Yeah, yeah, that was well said. I think there's definitely proper etiquette to go about. Like, I think that the big ones would be to explain, first of all, get consent to the other person, but then secondly, explain to them, hey, this is just for us. Like, I'll send you a copy. We can
Yeah,
study it
yeah. I
together.
think that goes a long way with people too. If you say, "Hey, I'll send you the round afterwards,"
Yeah,
people are often very happy about that. They're like, "Oh, that'd be great. I would love to dig into that and see what I could have done better," type of thing.
yeah, yeah. If you're flying triangling your training partner and posting to Instagram and tagging
Sure,
them, that's gonna that's gonna.
not cool. Definitely not cool.
Now, speaking of, like, you mentioned that you set up an iPad back in the day, which is a cool idea. With all the emerging technology we're seeing now with AI and all these apps that are available on the phone for video editing and for data collection and data organizing, have you seen any like anything from the tech world that seems beneficial for helping people progress better in jiu-jitsu, or even as a school owner to just organize classes? How has technology, like especially with AI recently, impacted?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, definitely, from not necessarily from the jujitsu side of things, but AI from a business side of things has been, hugely helpful. You know, from like helping you create ads to like writing email. There's so many, I think, useful applications for it. I mean, from a jiu-jitsu side of things, I haven't seen anything like that. Although one of my students has one of my students, Josh Flores, he actually just turned 18 today, but he's one of my best competitors. He's been competing in the adult division since he was like 14 years old.
Wow.
But he would like, I would teach him a lot of like one-on-one sessions, and he would set up, he would record all the sessions. He would go back and watch them, and he would set up. He had like it wasn't like a GoPro, but it was a motion detector like phone holder that would just follow him around the room.
Yeah.
Like it would stay on a tripod, but when he would like roll out of the frame, it would turn and follow him, which I thought was pretty cool. He doesn't have to stay in the frame. The thing just pans around the room and follows him wherever he goes. That's not really
awesome.
AI, but I did think that was pretty cool.
That is cool. It's great that it works too. Cause I was watching a video not long ago of a guy that was competing, and I remember who this was, but it's just someone I saw on Instagram. Their match starts, and for some reason, one of the other coaches on the sidelines was moving a lot, and the camera just went to him. So it's the whole match of just the other guy's coach
funny.
at the side of his
really
head.
Funny. That's very funny.
Yeah, but that is cool that your student had that set up though, and that is a good example of technology helping.
Sure, yeah.
Jason, let me ask you, man, what is something that you wish you knew or something that you wish you did early on in your journey that you think would have accelerated you even faster along the way?
I definitely think I did when I was like blue, purple, brown belt. I did a lot of static drilling, which I don't want to say is wrong. I think that like did have a lot of positive effects for me, but I think I kind of didn't learn to think for myself until I was a black belt. Like, and when I say think for myself, I think for myself as a grappler, and like kind of trust my ability to like create my own iterations of a particular technique or movement. I think you may learn a particular movement or a technique from an instructor, and as long as like the core principles are followed that make that technique work, I think you're like free to kind of play around with slight different variations or tweaks or things like that. And kind of when I was coming up, I would very much like, I would watch a lot of AOJ online or Art of Jiu-Jitsu or MG in Action or whatever. A lot of these like these are not that AOJ online is not popular now, but these were very popular at the time before like the instructional market was really big. This is years before that. And I would subscribe to all these. I would watch these, and then I would like go in before class, like an hour or two early, and drill all this stuff and try to like do it exactly how it was shown to me. And sometimes I would kind of, in training, I would not come up with, but naturally I would do my own like variation or take on different things. And I would think, I was like, oh, that's incorrect. Like it was shown this way, I should be doing it that way. But like, especially training under John Danaher, I kind of learned to think for myself a little bit more and like problem solve on my own. And like some of the things that I think I'm best at or that I'm most successful with are things that I kind of, put my own little twist on, or like have my own iteration of the way I do it. So I kind of wish I learned to trust that when I was like earlier in my, in my career, I would say.
That's a great answer, man. I know exactly what you mean too. I think that when you're taught something one way, you think, okay, this is the correct way, and there's no other variation of this
Sure.
that's right. But then you come to realize, like, as long as the mechanics, the core mechanics are all in place, there's different variations of everything. I mean, think of how many different finishes and setups for arm bars there are. And it'd be funny for someone to sit there and think, oh no, that variation's wrong. It's like, no, not necessarily.
Yeah.
If it's, if the fulcrum's in place and the mechanics are good. Yeah.
Just because someone didn't teach it to you doesn't mean that it's wrong or it's not going to work.
Yeah.
And I think, like I would only try to do things that were taught to me. And that's just, I mean, I would say most blue belts should probably adhere by that to a certain degree, but I think as I got higher up in the ranks, I still kind of adhered to that. But like, especially training at Hensel's, I kind of learned to really think for myself and do less of like copying. And not to say that copying is, and when I say copying, I mean watching somebody else do something or perform something and then emulate it, which I think is an extremely effective way to get better. But I think it could be a combination of watching someone else's solution to a particular problem, you troubleshooting that yourself, and then kind of coming up with a solution that is maybe a blend of like what you saw that person do, or what you saw someone do who has a similar body type to you or similar like attributes to you, and kind of coming up with your own like solution to that problem with the guidance of maybe your instructor, watching some high level athletes, and maybe some instructionals, like a combination of things, not just like I'm going to do it exactly the way this person does it.
When you're experimenting with something new that you're drilling or working on or trying to potentially add to your game, what metrics do you follow that determines whether or not it's going to be part of your game or whether or not you're going to scrap it?
So I would say, it can be a little bit, I don't want to say like false positive, but, and depending on, as a view for the viewers listening, like where you stand in the hierarchy of the people that you're training with. Like, for example, there's definitely things that I would say, I don't want to say are bad techniques or maybe less efficient or optimal movements that I could potentially make work against some of my training partners, just because I'm more experienced, I'm a black belt, maybe bigger, overall, like more complete grappler than some of my training partners, that I can make things work that are maybe less optimal. So I would say, like, definitely at the beginning, if there's something that I think is effective, I'll start maybe drilling it with very light resistance or drilling it statically. Usually, like the prerequisite for starting to do something would be, seeing if there's any other people doing it at a high level type of thing. So not to say that I wouldn't start practicing something that's not being done at a high level, because otherwise, how do people come up with new metas or new techniques over the years? Like, someone's got to be I don't want to say the first person to do something, but like maybe the first person to start doing that trend at a certain period of time. So not to say I wouldn't do something like that, but if I see it being used at a high level, I know it's probably pretty good. And then I try to like adapt that into my game or fit that into my game. I start by doing it against, lower level training partners or people that I think I'm going to have success with it against, so I can get like a baseline feel and, I kind of feel, and I don't know what the word is, but baseline sensitivity for how the technique or the movement feels against a resisting person, and try to do it repeatedly against, a resisting person that I think I'm going to have like pretty good success with it against. And then like I'll scale that up the ladder of training partners, try it against someone that is going to be harder to do it to, or pick a body type or a person that I know is going to be very difficult to do it to, and try to do it to that person. So especially, and this might not apply to everybody, but if you're in a situation where you're maybe towards the top of that like training partner hierarchy, or you're one of the better people in the room, sometimes, again, when you're learning new techniques or you're trying to improve, and I don't want to say learning new techniques, but learning new skills, you're trying to or improve current skills, I think you want to stack those skills against the appropriate training partner. There might be someone who's very, very good, but has, let's say, poor guard or poor open guard retention. Like, that's maybe not the best person to practice your outside passing with, or use that as a metric to determine whether your outside passing is good or not. Versus the blue belt, who maybe their overall game is not that good, but they're really flexible and really good at retaining their guard. Maybe that's a good person to try your outside passing sequences against. If you kind of catch what I'm saying, pick the training partner that has the skills necessary to, give you a good metric for whether that particular skill you're working is going to be successful or not.
Yeah, that's outstanding advice, man. Yeah, it really is an interesting thing too, because like when you're trying to implement new techniques or new skills, there's always that threshold of like learning. There's a learning period. There's a phase you're going to have to go through where it's going to fail a bunch. And sometimes it can be easy for someone to think, okay, well, this has failed 5 times, so maybe this just isn't, maybe it's not quite as effective as I thought. But maybe that 6th or 7th time would have been when something clicked had you not given it up.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
It is kind of a weird thing where you can sometimes abandon something preemptively and unfortunately miss out on developing it. In fact, I remember one thing I ran into early on in my training is that I would learn things, and if they didn't start working pretty quickly, I would just write it off as, okay, well, this is just not a thing for me or my game. Like, I see other people using it, so clearly it works, but maybe it's just not my thing. And the truth is that my level of understanding in jiu-jitsu at the time was just not high enough to make it work properly.
Sure.
So it's kind of weird. Like, now that I'm a black belt, there's been several things that I abandoned as a blue or white belt that I'm now recycling. And like, oh my God, dude, if I had just done these couple little things or not scrapped this so quickly, this is something I could have used really effectively the whole time.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. I definitely think, I think when you're learning something new, if you can control this, I think getting yourself to have success early with it by, and not everyone has the luxury of being able to pick their training partners, but like, picking somewhere you feel like that's going to be successful, or it's going to be successful early, because I think that's important to developing confidence and like a sensitivity for that movement. If I'm learning like a knee slice or passing half guard, if I do it to some people that I know I'm going to be able to successfully complete it against, then I'll get at least a little bit of a sensitivity for how to pin their shoulders, how to slice my knee across, how to get hip to hip. And then when I like scale up the ladder, it's going to make more sense. And I'll see, okay, I tried it on this person. This part didn't work, but I kind of understand what's going on. Versus, if you're not trying against the right person, or if you're earlier in the belt ranks, or if you're white in the blue belt, and there's just simply no one you're able to execute much of anything on, it can be very hard to add those new movements in. So I think once you get to a certain threshold and you have, if you're at the 50th percentile in your training room, half the people are quote unquote like below you in skill, you can effectively like, okay, I want to work my wrestling. Let me work it on this guy over here. I think he'll be a good partner where I'll be able to execute the movements, but I'll still. Yeah. I have 2 cats. They just, they're fine.
They do jujitsu. Yeah.
Yeah, they're doing jujitsu. Let me just get them out of here. Come on.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so you were saying that, yeah, basically you're as you're testing it against people that have a reasonable level to build data against, you'll scale up from there as you.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
That's awesome. Jason, you're a very well known competitor, a very effective competitor, and now you're a coach teaching other people how to compete as well. So I think this is a good question to ask you. What do you think are some things that hold aspiring athletes back, in your opinion?
I think, and this is something I've heard John Danaher say. He said it to me personally, and many other people. But I think there's a difference between the skills that you're actually good at and that you have the confidence to actually use in a competitive setting. So, you could be a very good guard passer, and you see this all the time, where in the training room, someone may have like a fairly wide set of skills that they're good at. But when it comes time to competition, comes time for competition, for whatever reason, that like skill set like kind of shrinks down to only a couple of things that they feel truly confident in. And usually it's the things that they're probably the very best at. But we all know that the best competitors usually have a diverse range of skills that they can switch between to, when they're going against people their level. You can't rely on one set of skill. You can't rely on only leg locks or only wrestling or only something. You have to be able to combine leg locks with sweeping, with back takes, and all those things together. And I think people, they may develop skills in the training room, but they won't have the confidence to pull the trigger with those skills in competition. So I think like actively as you're competing, especially if you're very successful, and I'm applying this to people, I guess, with potential to compete at a high level, is making sure you're getting adequate competition time, working or using those like secondary type skills that are maybe not your A game, but you're still very good at, and that you might have to pull out and use in a competitive setting, if that makes sense.
It absolutely does. Yeah, I think everyone has their A game and the stuff that they love to do. And I think that when the adrenaline of competition kicks in, a lot of times, like you said, you just kind of revert back to what you feel most confident in. But
sure.
what you described is so important. You've got to have a secondary and tertiary game in case someone throws you for a curve. You never know.
Sure.
If someone might be the exact kryptonite to your A game.
Sure, exactly.
Yeah. You
don't
want to
use those secondary type skills. I actually had a student. He competed. Well, he competed last weekend in the New York Open, which he won, but he competed maybe a couple weekends before, and he's a blue belt, but he's won like 32 matches straight. He's, excellent competitor, has, very, very high ceiling and a bright future. But in one of the tournaments he did, he's a good wrestler. He's a really good top game, really good wrestler, good guard passing, good back takes. But the particular kid he was facing was, a collegiate level wrestler. And my student Jacob wrestled in high school, and then, he didn't wrestle in college or anything. He's just been, training jiu-jitsu since high school. So we game planned. We're like, you could probably wrestle this kid, and there's a good chance you would win. But we definitely know that if you pull guard and entangle his legs, you can leg lock him. Even though Jacob had never leg locked anybody in competition, in training, I've seen him leg lock plenty of people, and I personally work with him one-on-one, and I know he can leg lock people. So the game plan was to pull guard and leg lock this guy, and he successfully did. He pulled guard, he put the guy in 50-50, and heel hooked him, and it was just good for him to have to use that skill in competition. That's a skill that he uses in training a lot, but in competition he never uses. He sticks to his wrestling and guard passing. But we kind of, I don't want to say forced him, but told him, you're going to use these skills in this match. This is a good opponent for it, and we want to build confidence in those skills for the future. So I think that's a perfect example of he's in his early days of competing. He's a blue belt, has a bright future ahead of him. We want to get those quote unquote competitive reps of him using those secondary skills in early, so that way in 2-3 years from now, when he's potentially in the finals of the trials, or competing to win the ADCC trials, he has confidence in using multiple skills, not just the things that he's best at.
That's great. Yeah, that's a perfect example too of the importance of understanding strategy as a competitor too. You've got to be able to recognize your strategic approach depending on what you're dealing with. And there's a lot of people, for example, that go into tournaments injured. It's okay, well, man, I'm just coming off of a slightly torn LCL, so I'm not springing off my left leg as well as I normally would. So that means some of my takedowns might be affected. So what do I need to do? So yeah, you got to be able to calculate some of these things. And that's something that I think is important for competitors to hear too.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely.
Yeah. When I asked you initially, when we started the conversation, what are some things that help other students accelerate faster than others? One of the first things you said was consistency. And I think that's above all else, probably the most important answer. On that topic, what kind of advice do you give to your students about training when they don't feel like it? What should they be on days where they're just not into it? They're not mentally there, but they're showing up because they want to remain consistent, which is important. What should some goals be? What should the focus be on days like that?
I would say for somebody, this is a good question, because I would say, depending on, your level of commitment to training, if you're somebody who, I don't want to use the word hobbyist, but someone who is training 2 or 3 days a week, has no real competitive aspirations, but does this for fitness, fun, building confidence, there's certainly going to be some days you don't feel like training. Someone like that, I wouldn't necessarily push them to push through, you got to train on the days you don't want to train type of thing. But I would also caution them on, taking too many days like that, because this thing that you're doing 3 days a week, you start taking days off, that could quickly become 1 day a week, and it could quickly become you're no longer training. I would say jiu-jitsu is not exactly working out. There's some people obviously love going to the gym and like working out. I would say most people who train jiu-jitsu do jiu-jitsu because they enjoy it, and most people, not saying they don't enjoy going to the gym and working out, but they probably enjoy the results more than they enjoy the actual workouts. Not to say there's no one that enjoys it, but it's the type of thing all right, I know I should do this. I want to be healthy, and not to say there's no effect like that with jiu-jitsu, but usually jiu-jitsu is done for fun. Obviously you're learning an applicable skill. You are getting in shape. It is good for you. I would say in moderation. Definitely, you do it too much, you're going to have a lot of injuries, no question. But I would definitely caution somebody to push themselves through it if they're in that category of not being a serious competitor. I would say if you're you have aspirations to be a serious competitor, and that doesn't necessarily mean they have to be young. You could be in your 40s and you have goals to win masters, worlds at black belts. That's a serious competition, and you're going to probably have to train someone who's training to win the ADCC trials. You might not be in the same category as them, but you're still going to have to train like that. I would say certainly you're going to have to train on days that you don't want to, but I would say you need to develop an honest assessment of whether you should take a day off because you're actually overtrained, or maybe you have an injury, or are you just telling yourself that because you don't want to train, type of thing. And truthfully, only the athlete can know that. As a coach, I can't possibly know. If you say your knee hurts and your knee really hurts, maybe you can drill, or you can work around it a little bit with people you trust, but maybe you should just take off and rest. But if you're just saying that because you don't really want to train, as a coach, I can't possibly know the difference, right? So I think individuals have to be honest with themselves. If they're if they don't want to train, and it's because they just don't want to train, maybe they're a little mentally exhausted, sometimes it's good to push through it. But if you're truly overtrained, your recovery shot and you're mentally drained, there's nothing wrong with taking a day off, of course. But, going back to consistency, I would say, if you can program for yourself like a set number of days that you're training, a set number of days, maybe you're lifting weights or doing whatever, and like sticking to that as best you can, I think that's better than like being gung-ho twice a day for 2 weeks straight and then training twice the following week because you're all banged up and tired,
Yeah. Yeah, no, that was very well said. Yeah, I think that yeah, recognizing whether or not you're actually hurt or potentially going to get hurt by continuing and pushing through is an important thing. And I like what you said too, that 3 days can become 2 and 2 can become 1 and 1 can become you leave. That's very true too. So you got to keep that truth in mind also. But it's funny. Like I recently I injured my neck, not just a couple months ago. And I was having this deal where when I turned my neck to the side, my whole right arm would just start getting like pins and needles. So I was like, okay, maybe I really do need to take some time off then, because, one stiff crossface could now turn this into, instead of pins and needles, it could be like really burning and hurting, So I took a little time off, even though I didn't want to. But then there's other days where sometimes I'm tired, like maybe the kids didn't sleep so well, which means I didn't sleep so well. And it's kind of a busy day or whatever. And so then I just kind of convinced myself, I'll go tomorrow. But on the days that I do, even when I have those kinds of days, if I make myself go 9 times out of 10, I'm glad I went. I'm like, yeah, you know what? I actually had a great day today in training, even though I felt like shit and didn't want to be there at first. I perked up once I got there. I think that most people will probably find the same thing if you truly love rolling and love doing jiu-jitsu.
Absolutely. Yeah. I definitely agree with that. I mean, the same could be said about, working out. There are days I don't want to go lift weights, and there's definitely more of those days than there are days I don't want to train jiu-jitsu. But I mean, I'm never, after I lift, I'm never like, I'm pissed off I went. I'm always, of course, you're happy you went. And I would say in jiu-jitsu, it's the same. There's the only difference I would say is, maybe in the case that you mentioned with your neck. I actually was dealing with some neck issues recently as well. But the only times I would feel that way is when I was injured and I pushed myself to train and I got more injured. That's the time when I'm saying I'm an idiot. Why did I train today? Type of thing. And usually for me, it's more in that direction than I don't want to train today. It's more like I'm hurt. I probably shouldn't train, but I'm going to train anyway.
Yeah. And Jason, believe me, I've called myself an idiot so many times over the years for doing that exact same thing. So like, why did I do that? I should have known better. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. Many times for me as well.
Jason, I'll tell you what, man, we've reached about the halfway point of the show. You've done this with me before. For the regular listeners, you guys already know what's coming. For the people new to the show, I play a game halfway through every episode with my guest. It's a game called the Pummel. The Pummel is a series of random questions. Some of these have to do with jiu-jitsu. Some of them have nothing to do with jiu-jitsu. Jason, you've played this before. I'm going to try to ask you some questions that I don't think I asked before, but if you're down to play the Pummel again, I'd love to play this.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, man. Question 1, what's the largest animal you think you could beat in hand-to-hand combat?
Largest animal. That's a good question. I guess it depends on the animal. Maybe like sloths aren't that big. I don't think. I don't know.
Sloth. You're definitely faster than a sloth.
I could definitely beat a sloth. I'm not that fast, but I think I'm faster than a sloth. Maybe like maybe like a deer, like a female deer or something like that.
Okay.
If I jump on its back or something, I don't think I can beat that many animals. Any animal, at least my weight, I think it's going to be tough.
My favorite thing about hearing these answers from guests is imagining the setup. So like, okay, you're in a fight now with a female deer. Are you snapping down to a front headlock? Where are we starting? Like, you know what I mean? Like, how do you envision that going down?
If I got the drop on it, I think I might, like if I could jump on its back first, I might have a decent chance. If I had to face it head on, I mean, it doesn't really have antlers. I don't know how a deer kick with their front legs. So maybe I'm in good shape. Maybe front headlock, try to guillotine it or something. I don't know. I do like these questions though. These like, how many grown men would it take to take out a polar bear or something crazy like that? Yeah. I'm always into those questions. Yeah.
Yeah, I like these too, because I'll every now and again when someone gives like an answer of an animal I haven't considered, I'll go research it, and I'm like, oh yeah, dude, there's no way this guy's going to out wrestle a chimp, or like there's
No,
no way
no
that
way. Oh, a chimp.
yeah,
Oh my God. No way. No way.
it's a good educational thing for me too. It makes me do a little research and realize, oh yeah, humans suck at fighting compared to the rest of the animal kingdom. If we didn't have technology, we'd be screwed. Yeah,
we're not very well equipped for fighting. I do have to agree. We're good at holding weapons, but that's about
yes.
it.
Technology is how we win for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Jason, if you found a genie lamp on the ground and you could get 3 wishes, the normal genie rules apply so no wishing for more wishes and no killing anybody. What 3 wishes would you choose?
I'm sorry. Say the first part. You said the normal rules apply for.
Yeah, for the normal genie rules. So you can't kill anybody and you can't wish for more wishes. What 3 wishes would you choose?
I would probably wish to be like 20, be like 15 again, or maybe not 15, maybe 17 or 18, but in body, but have the same mind I have now. So something like that. So I feel like I could, retain my like skills in jiu-jitsu, but be that young and have like a non-injured body again. Would definitely be one of the things I would do. I mean, can I just wish for a bunch of money? I would.
Yeah,
do
sure,
that.
of course. Oh, of course.
Wish,
yeah, of course.
Wish for, X amount, $10 billion, some insurmountable amount of money that I would never have to do any work again, type of thing. Although I do love what I do, so I think I might regret. Not, I don't want to say regret that one, but I do enjoy building the academies up and like building the business end of things. So I might feel unfulfilled later if I pick that, but I think I can't resist the urge to just like ask for a whole huge sum of money.
Of course. Yeah, you want to make sure your great grandkids never have to work again.
Yeah,
that'd be good. Yeah,
yeah. Maybe if I could present to the world that I didn't just get it from a genie, if I got it legitimately, that would look better. But
it's like the amount of private classes this guy is doing is unbelievable, and his seminars.
Yeah, right.
And then you get one more. Yeah,
one more. I don't even know. A third wish: money, jiu-jitsu. Can I live? I don't want to live forever. Maybe like live to 150 or something like that.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
So I think that's extend my life until the point where that I don't want to extend it anymore. Or something like that.
You'd still want to have the option to be out if you wanted to. Otherwise, you end up like there was that Will Smith movie Hancock, where you're just alive. Because then like anyone you ever know is eventually going to die, and like you just meet generations of people that all I definitely
don't want to live forever.
Yeah.
Maybe I pick me and my wife live till we decide not to anymore, or something like that.
That's a good answer. That's a good one.
Yeah.
Because there's also the possibility of like a in the future like an apocalyptic nuclear kind of thing.
Of course.
So the world's gone now. You're just walking around rubble because you made a stupid wish a long time ago.
Not good. That's not a good plan. I don't want to be stuck like that.
Good answers, man. Jason, have you ever had a supernatural experience? Have you ever like seen what you thought was a UFO or a ghost or anything like that?
I have not. No, I've never had that type of experience. It's interesting because I don't want to say I wanted to have one, but I almost feel, I don't want to say I feel like people are lying, but I've never had anything even remotely supernatural or anything like that. Never seen a figure or a ghost or anything. I'm like, not that I don't really want to have the experience, but I definitely, I don't know. I've never had it, and it makes me feel like no one else has had it too. Not to say that's true, but not to deny, or if you have or anyone else listening has had one, I've just never had one, and it makes me feel like it's not real. Not to say that's true, but it just makes me feel that way.
No, for sure. I think the problem with supernatural stuff, especially with aliens and Bigfoot, is the types of people that consistently have these experiences, and they're not always the most credible people. And like it's never like a Neil deGrasse Tyson person who's been abducted by aliens. It's always
of course.
It's always a guy that's kind of out there already. He's probably kind of the weird dude in his town kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, I will say people who've had like, Bigfoot, okay, I'm not going to believe you. Like aliens, probably not. I mean, there's definitely, I know there's some conspiracies, but people who've had maybe ghost experiences, something like that, I feel like that's probably more believable than Bigfoot, because I mean, like, ghost experience, like, hundreds of thousands of millions of people have had those, as far as I know, those experiences. I personally never had one. The idea of having one kind of freaks me out a little bit, but I've met people who say, yeah, like, I saw a ghost sitting in my bed. I'm like, really? Like, I've never experienced this. Maybe I'm just not in the right places. I don't know.
Yeah,
But,
yeah. Not hanging out in creepy spots enough.
Yeah, sure.
Now, I think aliens. I definitely believe in the possibility of aliens. I think that's probably very true of all those things. But for me, ghosts and Bigfoot, yeah, those are kind of.
Well, I definitely think as far as aliens, in terms of in the universe, is there any other intelligent life, or has there ever been? I definitely think there is, or will be, or is concurrently. I mean, people who say they've seen UFOs, like, I don't know if I believe that. Like, have aliens been to Earth? Like, I would say probably not. But I definitely think there's some type of life form that is reasonably intelligent, as intelligent, if not more intelligent than us, or something along those lines. I think mathematically there like almost has to be, given how gigantic the universe is and how many Earth-like planets there are. It seems like it's almost like a certainty in my mind.
Yeah,
but
that's the same way I feel too. Yeah, I think the galaxy is just so damn big, and there has to be other stuff out there. There has to be.
I think there's something called the maybe I have it, the Drake equation. It's like, it's an equation for, like, I guess how many stars there are in the galaxy, and how many, based on like the data we have, how many like Earth-like planets there are in the galaxy, and it's some like absurd number, like tens of millions of like Earth-like planets, and like just the probability that the same conditions like arose are just so high based on this mathematical formula. I don't know if I'm saying all of it correctly, but it's just an interesting thing to think about. But
yeah, no, it really is like almost hard to comprehend how vast
sure,
it is.
Yeah.
So, did you ever see that show Ancient Aliens that used to be on back in the day?
I never did. No.
Oh, it's a good show. So let me preface this. The first and maybe some of the second season were real good, but then they started just kind of reaching. But there's some really interesting stuff in there about how there's all these theories that like the Egyptians and the Mayans and all these people were influenced by like alien visitors. And some of it's pretty crazy. Like some of it's really, really interesting.
This is like a
History Channel.
It's a History Channel show. Okay.
Yeah,
So it's not like a dramatized. Okay, it's a series.
No. This is like they talk to like historians and
like a documentary type
yes,
show.
Exactly, like a docuseries. Yeah, and it was, man, the first season was outstanding. The second season was okay, but then it's one of those things where like the show had success. So like what should have been a 1 season or 2 season thing, they're like, History Channel executives are like, hey, let's make more. So now they're like, was Abraham Lincoln an alien? It's like, oh, you guys are like killing the show now. So it got out there, it got weird. But the first season, you should definitely check it out. It's pretty cool.
I would watch that, definitely.
Yeah. Jason, do you have any tattoos? And if so, what's your favorite one?
I do not have tattoos. No.
No tattoos. Nice.
No tattoos. When I was younger, I think I went through a phase where I wanted to get like tribal tattoos, and I'm happy I didn't. Not that there's anything wrong with tribal tattoos, just for who I am, my personality. I don't think they would fit me right now. But I have no tattoos. I don't plan on having any tattoos.
Yeah, I think tribal tattoos are definitely, you see a lot of cover-ups with people that have, or removals with people that got the tribal thing. They were cool. They were cool once upon a time, and I think they kind of went out of style after like the 90s. Yeah, but I was right. I was too. Like when I was a kid, I was like, oh, I want this like tribal, like a band on my arm, like get some barbed wire. It's gonna be so unique. I'll be the only one that has it. You know?
Sure, right. Well, yeah.
What do you think's the worst job you ever had?
So I worked. There was a period when I was younger. So I went to high school, and I never finished college. I basically would not go to school to train jiu-jitsu, which in retrospect turned out to work out. I would never advise anybody to do that right now. So there was a period when I wasn't in school. I was training, and this is because I did start working for Matt like full time when I was a brown belt. And this is before that time, so I would teach a few classes here and there. Like I would maybe do a few privates. So like I wasn't really in any way making money off jiu-jitsu. But so there was a period I was working like 3 jobs at once, just to, make money. And one of them, I worked at a tennis club that was near my house. And I was basically like the reception type person. Like I would sit at the front desk and check people in. and I hated it. It was miserable. I had to work. I remember I had to work like 3 to 11 Saturday and Sunday or something. It was
Oh,
just
dude,
like
that's rough.
it was terrible hours. At that point, like I would usually go out afterwards. When I was younger. I mean, now I'm like asleep by 10 o'clock, even on the weekends. So that would never work. Obviously, never work for me. But yeah, it was just terrible. The particular people there were always like very snooty and rude, and I hated it so much. I dreaded going in there. But yeah, I just had no money. I just had to work whatever job I had to work.
Yeah, that I could see that being a rough one for a young guy, especially like having your weekends
Yeah,
completely erased just to check in yuppies
yeah,
playing tennis or whatever. That's gotta be, yeah, that's gotta be a rough
yeah.
one for sure.
I actually remember. I got the job. I at the time I had 3 jobs. I worked at like a physical therapy office, which I actually liked. Um, I worked as a PT aide there, and then the weekends I would do this, and then I would do like some delivery job every other weekend. But the job at the tennis club I got because one of my friends from from Matt Sarah's gym, who I went to high school with, he was like one of the tennis instructors there, so he got me like the desk job at the at the place. It's called Sport Time. So there's actually one. So this was like all the way in Nassau County where I grew up, but there's actually one by my house now where I live now. Um, I'm sure if I was playing tennis, I would love going there, but working there was awful. But at this time, Chris Weidman was still fighting. So it was like Chris Weidman versus Lyoto Machida. One of the night it was on a Saturday night. I was working there, and it was one of the UFCs that was on FX, I think, but maybe they did the prelims on FX or like the main card. I can't remember. So my friend Greg was there, and which Weidman took the fight with Lyoto Machida like on 10 days notice. He caught like a crazy amount of weight, so we put the fights on, and I got like in a ton of trouble from the tennis club for putting the UFC fights on, and like I guess a bunch of people complained. They thought it was in poor taste, like these 2 guys shirtless punching each other on TV. So I got in a lot of trouble. I don't want to say a lot of trouble, but I got scolded heavily for doing that. But I remember watching the fight and some like woman like, "This is disgusting. What are you watching?" Like, you know. But yeah, that's probably my most stood out memory from working. We're just getting yelled at for putting on the UFC at the tennis club.
That's so awesome though, dude. I did
Yeah,
this same thing when I worked at Home Depot. I was like 20. I didn't start training jujitsu. It was right before I started training jujitsu. And, but I was a big UFC fan. I think like, I remember cause I sat in this tool rental department of Home
sure.
Depot, which is like one of the most boring parts of the store to be in. And they had a little TV in there where you could pop in tapes that like feature, like how to use products or like different,
Yeah.
weed whackers and shit like that. I remember when there's nothing going on, when the store's dead, I just like pop in like Chuck Liddell versus Tito Ortiz or like Tank Abbott or whatever, like the old school fights. And then customers would come in, I'd have to turn it off. And finally a manager was like, "Hey dude, whatever cage fighting." He thought it was like pro wrestling. He's like, "You can't watch WWF in here." I was like, "All right, fine. Sorry, whatever."
That's
But
fine.
yeah,
That's
it helps pass the time.
Sure.
Jason, what do you think's your favorite bad food to eat? What's your favorite like junk food type food?
Um, Probably pizza, I would say. Um, yeah, I mean, being from New York, the pizza here is pretty good. I actually took maybe a month and a half ago, I took like a day trip to New Haven with 2 of my friends, and we went to Sally's and Frank Pepe's, which I'd never been to. Which, if you guys don't know, listening, according to Dave Portnoy, New Haven's the best pizza city in America. So I'd never been there, but I mean, they were amazing. It was
That's what I've heard. I've heard
yeah,
that.
very good.
Do they do a square pizza in Connecticut?
No, so it's New Haven style pizza is it's like very thin crust.
Okay.
So it's like very crispy and airy, thin crust. They usually do it in a brick oven. Um, they don't do a square, but so at Sally's, so I thought Sally's was better. Frank Pepe's is probably a little bit more well known, but Sally's, one of the slices, it was like there's no cheese on it at all. It's like just like a tomato slice, which when you think of pizza, obviously like cheese is a big component, but that was actually my favorite one. It was just like the crust, the dough, and it was like however they made the sauce, they just put the sauce on it. And that was my favorite. And they would just like drizzle, or not drizzle, they would like put a little bit of like Parmesan on top, and that was my favorite slice, I think.
I've never been to New Haven. I've had pizza around New York though. I did some real good pizza up in Brooklyn and also in Manhattan. Dude, I'll tell you one that surprised me. In fact, next time you're filming at the studios up in Boston with us, you got to drop into Regina's in the North End. Have
Oh,
you been there
interesting.
before? Have you had
I
pizza
haven't.
up in the
No,
North
no,
End?
no, no, not at all. No. Is that in Boston, or is that near the studio, or?
It is, yeah. It's in the North End, so yeah. So the studio's in Beverly, but it's so you go down to the city on the North End, which is the real old Italian neighborhood, and that's the location. There's two locations I think of Regina's, but I went to the one that was actually in the North End, and it was awesome.
Interesting. Wow. Yeah, I gotta try it next
It
time.
was real good. Yeah, I really recommend it. What would you say is your most hated food? What's something you cannot eat no matter what?
I don't know. I really don't mind. Like I would literally try almost anything. I would. The only thing I wouldn't eat is something like bugs or something like that, or some weird, maybe like, you know, like like a domestic pet.
Yeah.
I would not eat, like, but I would pretty much try anything. I don't know. There's not a lot of stuff that bothers me. I definitely have my preferred foods, but I'm pretty easy food wise.
Nice.
I wouldn't say there's anything I really hate.
That's awesome. Who's your favorite competitor to watch these days in jiu-jitsu? Do you have anyone in particular that you like to
That's a
follow?
good question. There's a lot of guys. I mean, I mean, I don't know if Gordon's considered retired or not, but I mean, I feel like he's the top of most people's list. But
Yeah,
I definitely like watching Gordon.
absolutely.
I certainly try to emulate, the things that he does. That may be a boring answer, but I think his game is I'm applicable to people in general because I don't think he relies too much on his attributes. He's just, very methodical and technical, and I think it's, if you have the knowledge, I don't want to say it's not easy to reproduce at all, but like it's easy to pick up on some of the things that he's doing. It's not relying on any attributes, and I think most people can do a lot of the things. So certainly Gordon's up there. Uh, I like watching Diego Pato a lot. I think he is a very unique, effective guard. I like the leg locking sequences he does. Just in terms of studying, like he's somebody I like to watch as well. Um, I think there's so many good guys now. I think just in general, like for example, like watching, the 88 kg division which would be my weight at ADCC, like just watching all the matches, like all the competitors are so good. There's things you could pick up from everybody, of course. I like watching Joseph Chen a lot. I like his passing style. I think it's very unique and obviously very effective, but I think he's a very like interesting way he blends his like outside and tight passing, which I really enjoy watching.
Yeah, great. Every one of those people you named is someone I study a lot. So that's great, man.
Sure,
Good
yeah.
choices. Let me ask you this: if you could have a superpower, what superpower would you choose?
Like just conventional superpowers, like probably fly. I think I would fly. It seems like pretty cool. This is a good one. Being able to fly, yeah, get places faster. It's probably be a lot of fun, I think. Um, Maybe like super strength, that'd be cool, but I feel like it'd be unfair to do jujitsu anymore. So maybe if I could turn that off or scale that down or something to train. Um, yeah. But I'll go with flying. I'll go with flying. Yeah.
Yeah, you got to take flying over
Yeah,
strength for
sure.
sure. Because you can
Sure.
just lift weights and get pretty strong, but flying, that's something
Yeah,
that no matter how
exactly.
hard you try, you're just going to get injured trying to jump off stuff and fly.
Sure.
Final question for the Pummel game, Jason. If jujitsu or martial arts didn't exist, what do you think you'd be doing with your life instead?
Interesting. I don't know, honestly. Um, like for me, it kind of just, you know, I kind of decided this is what I want to do when I was, fairly young, in my early 20s, and I'm trying to figure out a way to do it. I honestly don't know. I probably, like, I was never like a great, well, I consider myself a smart person. I was never a great student in school. I was never very focused. In jiu-jitsu, I'm very focused, and having, now having two gyms or two academies, I think I would be good in business in general. I don't know if I would have gotten to that point if it wasn't for this, but I think I'm, I have a pretty good knack for that. So I think I would, enjoy doing something like that. I think I would be good at it. But if I didn't have jujitsu, I don't think I would get to the point where I would, be running a business or anything like that. I think for me, it was something where like I could, put my whole self into and, you know, like fully dedicate and focus on something. And for me, it ended up, paying off a lot. And I don't think I would have necessarily found something like that if I didn't get into jiu-jitsu or if it didn't exist.
That's a great answer. I love it, man. And that was the final question for the Pummel game, Jason. Congratulations.
Sure.
You win again. You got your double underhooks.
Thank you.
Of course, man. So, man, before we go, I'd like to pick your brain a little bit on some technical jiu-jitsu stuff here.
Sure.
You've put out a couple of great instructionals with us on guard passing, and I'd love to pick your brain on that if you don't mind. So, what do you think are some of the most overlooked skills that are important to be an effective guard passer?
Sure. I think I would say like posture and weight distribution are extremely important, especially posture. I mean, regardless of what you're doing in jiu-jitsu, there's like an optimal posture that you want to be in when you're performing a given task. And I think, correct posture and weight distribution as it pertains to guard passing is going to, make it hard for the guard player to initiate any offense on you, initiate any offense on you while you're still in the pocket. And what I mean by that is I think it's relatively easy for a guard passer, and, I'm sure like people listening will think of somebody, I'm not talking about anybody in particular, but like there are competitors who play like this, that play very much on the outside, and they kind of like engage for a short period of time with like usually like quick explosive bursts of movement and then like back out again. They kind of go in and out, and that in itself could be an effective style. But I think there's very much a skill of really it's your posture, weight distribution, like body positioning to be in the pocket versus the guard player, which means like, to me, it means, where you're close to them, whether you have one leg inside or you're 2 feet inside splitting their legs, or headquarters or split squat, or you're like some type of hip and knee post, but you're very close to them and you're still like not getting entangled, not getting put in close guard, not getting wrestled up on. Like the guard player still can't do anything to you, type of thing. Like obviously if there's no engagement, you're 10 feet away from the person, they can't do anything to you. No one can do anything to you. But if you can stay in front of them, or not necessarily in front of them, but stay close to them and be able to put pressure on their guard without letting them do anything to you, I think that's a very like underutilized skill. And I think when beginners try to do that, maybe they go against a more advanced player, they start to knee cut pass, they get entangled very quickly, or they try to outside pass, they get entangled very quickly. But learning to do those things and put pressure on the guard player without getting your legs entangled, without getting put in like a conventional guard where the guard player can control you, or without getting put in close guard or getting wrestled up on or ending up in any type of submissions. I think that is like an important skill in and of itself, besides the actual skill of like, the passing itself, if that makes sense. To me, that is a skill of passing, but besides the actual guard pass, it's like being able to stand in front of the person, but still not let them get any offense going. And I mean, someone like Gordon, is a prime example of that. He passes in the pocket, like he has usually one leg inside, oftentimes forces half guard or combines it with outside passing, but he is like very much on you. He's not like backing up or running away or like disengaging and then coming back in. He's on you the entire time. And, dealing with that against a skilled person is like utterly exhausting on bottom, because you have no reprieve or break from that pressure, but then you still can't do anything to the person.
Yeah, that was an outstanding answer. I really like that. Yeah, when we think of playing guard, the guard is such a dynamic position. There's constantly configuration changes and threats and defenses and retention. And as a passer, you have to be able to shuffle through all those things and be able to stay. Sure. And like you said, if you're constantly retreating out and starting over, I think sometimes it's good to step back and kind of say, okay, let me reassess here and come back in. But ultimately, you do want to stay in the pocket, like you said, to eventually find the right opening and the right transition.
I will say with that skill too, depending on the rule sets, but in not all competitions, but a lot of competitions, there's not much incentive for the guard player to get back to their feet. So I think for translating to MMA or potentially teaching guys in MMA, like if you can stay in the pocket, you can also hold the person on bottom position, or hold the person in bottom position much more effectively, versus if you're 5 feet away from them and you're, going in and out, like the person's going to be able to stand up. So if that's any priority for you to hold the person on bottom, like you have to be in the pocket. And that doesn't mean you can't outside pass at all. It just means that you have to, be relatively close to them where there's enough pressure on them that if they go from a supine position to a seated position, there's like a big intermediate threat where the person would not elect to do that. And if they did, you would take their back or mount them or something along those lines.
Yeah, that's an excellent point for sure. Jason, I think passing guard in a no-gi setting can be really difficult for some people, like especially if they've spent many years training in the gi. They oftentimes find that their grips they rely on aren't available anymore, and things are faster and more slippery in nature in no-gi, and it can be frustrating. What do you think are some of the pillars of no-gi specific passing?
Sure. So it's interesting. I think there's, certainly if you look at the difference between gi and no gi, I think you'll see big differences. I don't say big differences, but you see the most differences in the guard play. And as a consequence, like the way passers pass the guard. So like, I think a lot of the passes in gi and no gi are similar, but the way you approach gi and no gi passing the guard is different. So for example, in the gi, there's obviously a lot more ways the bottom player can control the guard passer, using obviously the sleeves, the lapels, the grips on the pants. Like you have variations of lasso, spider guard, lapel guard, like all these different ways the person on the bottom can entangle. And when I say entangle, it doesn't necessarily mean like get into a leg locking position, but like tie up and tangle up the guard player or the guard passer. So I think what you see a lot from gi passers is, especially at a high level, is you see guys, they're a little bit more, I don't want to say like tentative, but they're much more tentative to allow the person to grab them. Because in no-gi, grips are much more superficial. Like, a grip may last, you grab someone's wrist, like how long can you hold someone's wrist for? It's a couple of seconds at the most, but like you have to immediately act and use that to translate to a better position. But in the gi, you can statically like hold grips for a long period of time. So you'll see the top player is usually much more tentative to allow grips on them. Or if the bottom player does get grips on them, there's usually a period of like static, like grip fighting where the top player is like slowly looking to pummel their arms to better positions where they can re-grip the bottom player and, free their legs from any entanglements. And then once they feel they have the opportunity, they usually go very quickly. Maybe they're in a spider lasso, for example. They'll clear the spider guard, they'll clear the lasso, and then right away, they'll start their Toriando sequence, and it'll be like boom, 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 and either they'll get an advantage, or the guard player will recover, and they'll create that like static type position again, and then there's that kind of like break in the action. So it's almost like a like isometric type position, and then it goes to an explosive position, and then it goes back to versus no-gi, it's like a lot more kind of pressure over time, because or at least the way I feel is the grips are less, they're less permanent. They're very like superficial. I don't want to say superficial, that's the wrong word, but they're less permanent. You might get a grip for a second or two and you have to act immediately, but it's much easier to get outside the feet in no-gi just because, the person can't effectively grab you. But I think you see more like pressure over time, whereas the gi, it's usually like static position, fight to get your grips, and then once you have your grips, you go. And you might hold those grips for the entire sequence, versus no-gi, it's a little bit more dynamic with what your hands are doing. And not to say there's not crossover, there's obviously a lot of crossover, but at least for me watching, that's what I've noticed, that you can see a lot of gi players that translate to no-gi, they kind of pass that way. They look to set their hands in a place they feel comfortable with, and then they chain together like 1, 2, or 3 different passes, and then they kind of go back to static position. Versus you see a lot of guys who only pass no-gi, they put like I'm not to say one is better than the other, but it's usually more like active pressure where you're like kind of wearing on their frames, wearing on their like ability to hold their knees to their chest, like making them push you, making them like carry your weight over a period of time, which leads to then like breakthroughs later on in the match. That's what it seems to me. Versus in the gi, if like I don't say me, but if a high level passer gets 2 grips on your pants and you have no grips on them, like it's very hard to stop the guard pass from coming. And you see that all the time. Like, they get 2 grips on the pants before you can set your feet in the right position or set your grips. It's like nearly impossible to at least stop them from getting past your legs. Maybe they won't secure the pass, but it's very hard to stop them from, at least getting an advantage in that position. But then in no-gi, it's very easy, because you can't hold the person's feet that effectively. So over time, over the period of a match where you continuously like put pressure on them, make them push you and carry your weight, you'll kind of like break them down over a period of time, and that will lead to the guard passes later on That's usually what I see, unless there's a big skill gap between the players.
As a renowned leg locker, and coming from a team that's renowned for their leg locks, where do you feel that that leg locks fall into place as far as using them for dilemmas while passing? How important is that to develop early on
for the top players?
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's a lot of, certainly it depends on the rule set if you're competing in, but like one very easy one that works, I think, very well at a high level, and you see this a lot, is, if the top player gets outside the bottom player's knees and starts to threaten their hip line, let's say to go on knee on belly, as an easy example, the bottom player usually has to like escape their hips, and their inside knee has to start to come across the bottom player's like waist or hips in some way to then recover and throw the top leg over. So that puts them in like an optimal position for an inside heel hook. So you see that dilemma a lot where the top player will threaten to pass, and as the bottom player's inside knee comes in, there's like an inside heel hook available, and they'll kind of catch the heel as they throw their legs in position. And then if the bottom player turns their knee to defend that, they open up the guard pass. I think that's a very, very, probably one of the most effective dilemmas that you can use on top to attack leg locks. Especially because it gives you heel exposure immediately. Like there's definitely a lot of dilemmas you can play with leg entries and passes, but I think these days, depending how good the people are, but getting leg entries is not always enough. Especially if both guys are good. A lot of times both guys can maneuver out of just getting a leg position, but getting a leg position with the heel caught is like a big deal. There's a good chance you're going to finish the person. So I think that setup in particular is very, very effective from a passing player's perspective.
Absolutely. Yeah. We've seen a lot of people use that very effectively as well. I think it's kind of funny. I always think when I'm working to pass someone's guard, especially if they have really good retention, Danaher's voice always comes in my head like, fuck it, try a leg lock. And I'm like, yeah, okay, I gotta do something, but it's great. It really is it's great to cause the reaction, because now the person's not so much just thinking retention. They're thinking, oh shit, he's coming after my legs, which causes things to open up. Right.
It causes that dilemma, of course. Like the knee turns one way, they give up the heel. The knee turns the other way, they give up the pass.
Absolutely, Jason. There's two great instructionals you have with us here at BJJ Fanatics. One is the modern split squat passing series that you did. The other's outside passing, and I'm interested in picking your brain on this one. So what's the connection between those two? Like how do you typically express to people how to understand when to switch between tight passing and more longer range passing? What are some triggers you're looking for?
Sure. The way I view it, and this is going to depend on the person and their attributes, but I think if you want to be a tight passer, you have to use, I don't want to say you have to use, but if you use a little bit of outside passing, it can go a long way for your tight passing. And what I mean by that is, I actually was talking to a student last night at my gym. This particular gentleman, he was over 40. He was telling me he has bad knees and like he doesn't feel comfortable doing outside passing, which I totally understand. And I would say, generally speaking, if you're young and mobile, like you're gonna have easier time moving side to side on your partner, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be young to be an outside passer or be mobile. But I think if you add in a little bit of outside passing, like I said, that can go a long way for tight passing. What I mean is, if you're trying to body lock past somebody and that person is in a seated butterfly guard and their elbows are glued to their hips and their knees are to their chest, good luck getting a body lock on that person. It's not easy. And you could, maybe through like attrition of constantly trying that movement, and maybe you don't get entangled, you sit on your knees and do that, it could work. But the idea of simply maybe like picking their ankles up to the sky and getting outside their feet with like a small, simple movement could produce the reaction of that person, actively kicking their legs away, trying to make space and sitting up, and giving you a great opportunity to set up a body lock, where the person is extending you with one hand, the other hand's on the mat, and their knees and elbows are disconnected. That's an opportune time to set up a body lock. Or simply, you don't even have to flatten them out. If you circle to one side for that person to follow you, usually you have to put a hand on the ground. You can't just turn in place, but then you can, but a lot of times a hand has to go on the mat. That hand on the mat is an underhook. Like if you can like work the timing of that, and it doesn't necessarily require you to be fast, but just have to have good timing of as that hand goes down, you go in for your body lock. You get very easily, that's an easy body lock setup that to me doesn't require much attributes at all. You have to be able to shuffle a little bit to one direction enough to make the person post their hand. You don't have to run around them 30 different times, to pass their guard. So to me, I think that's a perfect example of where they fit in. And then on the contrary, when you're tight passing, when you're loose passing, the person has to open up a little bit to defend. That opens up the tight passing. And then vice versa, when you're tight passing, I'm going to split squat, and I feel my partner is, very much like pulling their knees to their chest, and I'm having trouble executing that tight passing, like because their knees are so close to their chest. It's easy for me to get around their feet or their legs. Versus if the person's extending me away, that's usually my cue to continue the tight passing and like look to get inside that knee elbow space, because when they're extending, your body extends, there's going to be more space there. But if they're pulling their knees to their chest and curling their body in, it's relatively easy for me to back out and get a small angle on that person. It doesn't have to be a big movement, but now like they're in a situation where maybe I'm on one side and their knees are facing the other way, and it gives me a good chance to create a guard passing scenario. So like tight to loose, loose to tight, both ways work really, really well. And, you don't have to, I don't want to say you have to be a master at both. I mean, that would be ideal, but if you're looking to improve your game, if you incorporate a little bit, or if you prefer one and incorporate a little bit of another one, I think you're going to see like exponential results as opposed to just sticking to one type.
Yeah, I love what you said there, man. It's kind of like what we were saying earlier about the leg locks too. I think that there's just so much value about throwing variables, and making kind of keeping your opponents guessing.
Absolutely.
And it's kind of like if you ask someone to juggle one ball and toss it to each hand back and forth, that's easy. But if you add four now it's kind of like, okay, this is now you have to keep it guessing and keep it moving. So
like with things like that, whether it's submissions or guard passes, as long as like you have, I guess, legitimate threats with those things, and your opponent is forced to give a legitimate reaction, whereas if they didn't react, you would potentially, if I went to the outside and my partner didn't react, I would secure a pass. Like, that's what you need. Same with the heel hook, like the scenario we were talking about before. You need a legitimate threat on the heel hook to force that overreaction or overcompensation of your partner to then lead into, your follow-up attack.
Yeah, very well said. Well, guys, listen, if you're wanting to improve your guard passing game, Jason puts together really, really technical and deep instructionals. I really do recommend them. The one that we talked about, we're covering kind of two of them at the same time here. One is the modern split squat passing instructional that he has with us. The other is the outside passing. I really do recommend you guys get both of them and learn how to connect them together the way that Jason just described, because it's going to make you a phenomenal passer if you understand how to float between those two systems. And Jason did a phenomenal job, putting all this together and laying it out in a way that can easily connect everything together. So head over to bjjfanatics.com and check those out. Jason, in closing, what are some of your major goals for 2025? What are some things you hope to accomplish by the end of the year?
Sure. I hope that, my students and our team at Vanguard has a good showing at ADCC trials. That's a big goal competitively for everybody. That's like kind of our main focus, I would say, from the competitive side of things. Obviously there's other events and stuff, but like, ADCC is definitely the main thing that we're preparing everybody for. So, I think we're going to have a pretty good showing this year. And I think in the coming years, that's only going to improve. So I'm very excited for that. Definitely trying to get the guys ready. Personally, I do plan to do the trials this year. I kind of had a bad string of injuries the past like year or so. I had 2 surgeries last year. I just had an injection in my neck about a month ago.
Geez.
So, I'm still training, but, I'm definitely, feeling being 35, not to say that's too old to compete. It's obviously not, but, just from doing this, for 15 years straight, like many times training 2 or 3 times a day and like having no regard for like recovery and, moderation, like I definitely feel it right now, which is fine. But yeah, definitely I hope to compete this year as well. Either I'll definitely do the trials, assuming I'm healthy, and then Polaris as well. I do have a contract with them, so I'm really eager to get back and compete with them, and that's a little bit more manageable, just like having a super fight. Instead of preparing potentially for 6 or 7 matches at the trials, like over 2 days, which is a little bit tougher, but definitely competitively for myself and the students, that's what we're looking forward to. As far as like my gyms, I want to keep growing our gyms, keep spreading jiu-jitsu to the communities we're in, and keep building a good culture and environment at Vanguard.
That's excellent, man. First and foremost, I hope everything with your health continues in a good direction. I know that's 35 years.
Thank you.
35 years can be good or bad. It just depends on the mileage. So if your mileage is high, it's
definitely a little higher on the mileage.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you've been in this for a while, and you've competed in some of the toughest places and competed a lot. So it's not too surprising. But I hope everything continues to move in a good direction with you, physically. And then, dude, again, congrats on all the success with your school. It's awesome to see.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
The community. I love seeing people that have the experience and the knowledge, that are dedicated to being at the forefront of spreading the art. So thanks for what you do. And
sure.
And man, again, I appreciate your time. You're welcome back anytime. I always have a blast chatting with you here. So look forward to having you on another time in the future soon.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Ryan. I appreciate it.
Of course. Yeah. Guys, for anyone out there that wants to keep up with Jason, it's easy to do so. He's active on Instagram. It's Jason Rao BJJ89. Make sure you guys follow him there. Also, guys, check out his website, vanguardjj.com. If you guys are ever traveling through New York, make sure you drop into his academy. He's got 2 locations now. Jason, the first one was in Lake Grove, and the newest one is in where's the second one? Colmac. Perfect. So if you guys are ever traveling through New York, drop in, get some training. He's got a great culture in his gym, great, obviously high level jiu-jitsu. So swing by if you can. If you can't make it to New York and train with Jason, you can learn from him anywhere in the world here at BJJFanatics.com. The instructionals we talked about today in depth was the modern split squat passing system, and also the outside passing instructional that he has. He's got several others. In fact, Jason, you just wrapped up recording like a couple of weeks ago, didn't you? Didn't you make some new ones?
Yeah, I did. Yeah. Last week, actually. Yeah. So I did it's like called Outside Ashri Reloaded. So the first Outside Ashri instructional I filmed was probably like 2.5 years ago now. So this is kind of like an updated, I don't want to say updated variation, but it covers things that I didn't cover before, specifically like connecting ankle locks and heel hooks together. Especially in the last few years, the ankle lock meta has definitely been very prevalent, and there's a big interplay between those two things. Threatening an ankle lock and then go into heel hook and vice versa. So that's a big thing we talk about. And then I actually covered another passing instructional, but this specifically focused on connecting outside passing with tight passing. So we did cover the split squat a lot in that, but connecting it with the outside passing, and specifically with both of them, like using near side underhooks, which is something I haven't really covered in the past, like controlling that near side elbow knee connection. And that's something I've been doing more recently, but I've had a lot of success with it, and my students have too. So that's what we cover in that new instructional as well.
Awesome. Well, yeah, so guys, like Jason said, he just wrapped up the filming a week ago. So the team's going to be editing it now. By the time the episode goes out, hopefully it's on the website. I'm sure it will be. Just type in Jason Rao at BJJFanatics.com and check out the new ones and grab some of the old ones too, because they're all excellent. And that's going to do it for this episode, everybody. I really appreciate you tuning in. Please stay tuned for the next episode of the BJJ Fanatics podcast.